You remember the moment something in your life snaps. Not loudly like a vase hitting the floor, but quietly like a light switching off inside you. And then everything that follows feels unreal. That's how my night at the Larkspur Gala began. 3 sentences that would turn into a year of watching my life be rewritten by strangers. And yeah, that first sentence was the one that did it. Get this black woman out of my sight, she's contaminating the room. Spoken by a woman in silk, sharp as a paper cut, and meant to make me vanish, while I was 7 months pregnant wearing a dress I picked because my husband once said it made me glow. Act 1. The setup, the party, the shove, the silence. I'm Tess Monroe, nurse literacy volunteer, the woman who started a reading program in my old neighborhood. And that night I stood in a ballroom full of people who thought money made them human and discovered it doesn't. It makes some of them cruel. I had been coaxed into charity events before, smiled for photos, thanked donors, the small talk, the perfume that smells like success. But this time, something was different. Standing under chandeliers that should have felt warm, I felt like an exhibit under glass, every head turning, every whisper like a knife. At the center of it all was Vivian Cross, blonde, polished, practiced, and Alexander Gray, my husband, standing like a man watching a play he helped write but refused to direct. "You're not his wife, Tess," Vivian said, and she laughed like someone letting an animal out of a cage, like she'd revealed a private joke the room was supposed to love. "You're a trial run in a lab, and the experiment failed." You could hear the crunch of crystal, a waiter dropping plates, the sound of dignity shattering, and no one moved to stop it. You ever notice how rich people get quieter when cruelty becomes expensive? They look at their shoes and pretend the world is fine. I tried to argue for the label that said wife, calmly, because what else could I do? And suddenly I was being escorted by 2 men in suits. "Ma'am, we'll need to verify your invite." My name was on the program. My time and sweat were on every slide about the literacy initiative. But that didn't matter when the story someone richer told was louder. Alexander looked at me like he was watching a parade step on a stray dog. "Let's not make a scene," he said, tone like a TV anchor, no heat, no hurry. I held my stomach and felt the baby kick once like a small, furious protest. Then Vivian pushed me. First a shove, a theatrical shove, and then a boot planted where my life was growing. The room listened through dozens of phones recording, but listening isn't the same as acting. No one intervened. No one called out the obvious. A server bent and offered me his hand before any of the entitled did. I took it because the floor was cold, and I was holding the person who mattered more than the whole room, a heartbeat. Act 2. The fall, the plan, the pivot. You'd think the worst thing would be the physical pain or the humiliation that blooms in your chest, but the worst was the paperwork that followed. A stack of legal forms slid across the hospital bed like a menu annulment, printed in a font that felt like finality. Alexander dropped $500,000 on the table with the kind of calm that made it clear he believed money could buy the erasure of a human being and the future she carried. "Better for everyone," he said. "Better for whom I wanted to scream. Better for the people who call ancestry their altar and will burn anyone who threatens the pedigree that's who." The next day, the world helped them finish the job. Bank cards declined access, revoked, headlines skewed. Instability. Erratic behavior. Anonymous sources who sounded like echoes of the people who had pushed me out of rooms. My mother called and cried, "Who will believe you?" That tiny question lands like gravel in your mouth. You taste doubt even if you haven't earned it. I had thought I could stand alone. I had kept my distance from my brothers because I wanted to own my life, my work. Pride does funny things to you. So I tried their numbers heard in meetings. Unavailable. That flat, clean voice of the world deciding you're inconvenient. But here's the twist. Those meetings were part of a plan I didn't know existed. My brothers, Aaron, Malik, Jonah, Reed, they weren't suitcases of cash and empty promises. They were patient, strategic, the kind of men who run logistics companies and legal shops, the kind of men who had watched our whole family survive by being quieter and smarter. They called me at the edge of what felt like ruin and said, "Don't sign anything. Come to the brunch tomorrow. Let them think they won. I looked at the hospital window rain like a curtain, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not rescue, not yet, but the thin thread of a counterattack. So we went to the estate, the place with tennis courts that cost more than my high school, full of chandeliers and old money performing itself. Vivian took the stage, announced a new era between clinks of expensive glass, and then she said the line they always wanted to hear, "We're expecting." The crowd clapped like seals. Gloria Gray, Alexander's mother, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief stitched with a name, the kind of symbol meant to say, "We belong to a line that matters." But then the sky made a sound, deep, undeniable, and a jet black as a rumor sliced the air and touched down on a private runway most of the guests didn't openly know existed. Down the stairs came Aaron Malik Jonah, suited unhurried with the kind of quiet that makes rooms tilt. They walked through the crowd like a tide. Behind them, they brought paper, contracts, emails, bank transfers, little facts that are very inconvenient when your whole identity is built on pretending you never did certain things. "What you arranged," Aaron said, voice low. "We documented." He handed over transfers from Gloria to Vivian recordings and a merger agreement that made Alexander's face melt like candle wax. You watch someone you thought you loved get exposed like a counterfeit painting, and something in you either turns to ash or steals. I felt cold, then clearer than I had in months. The brothers had set a trap, not to humiliate, but to reveal. They had made a chessboard out of the lies and put the truth in plain sight. Act 3. Truth repair and the question that keeps coming. When the police walked up the gravel drive, it felt cinematic because it was the kind of moment where cameras stop being strangers and become witnesses. Vivian was led away in cuffs, her jaw set like a woman who had consolidated cruelty into a profession. Gloria's name was dragged into documents and headlines that would refuse to forget her deeds. Alexander was asked to choose between loyalty to a legacy and loyalty to truth, the choice that finally woke him from whatever childhood spell his mother had cast. But here's where the story stops being about revenge and starts becoming something I could live with. I refused to let their story be the final sentence of mine. I spoke not with the brittle righteousness of someone hungry for an audience, but with the slow, steady thing you'd expect from someone who'd delivered babies at 3 a.m, who'd taught kids to sound out their first words, who'd written grant proposals by lamplight. I spoke to the room. I am not a test subject. I said, I am a person who taught 10,000 children to read. I delivered lives into the world. I am not a stain to be wiped away. And then I left. Not that night, not in a drama. I left by building. With my brother's help, we opened a clinic, the New Dawn Women's Center, in the neighborhood with the cracked sidewalks where I learned to be stubborn, and we put in prenatal care counseling jobs programs. We turned public humiliation into a place where people could get help without being judged, and we did it in a building that welcomed the woman the city sometimes forgot. The aftermath wasn't tidy. Vivian pleaded guilty, not because she found a sudden moral clarity, but because evidence folds even the proudest arguments, and her sentence felt light to some harsh to others. Gloria lost positions houses friends, which is not an ideal of justice, but its consequence. Alexander did therapy, not listed as redemption so much as a record that a man had to learn how not to look away. And my daughter, small, stubborn, laughing at sunrise, became a bright punctuation in a paragraph that had been heavy for a long time. What this whole thing taught me in the bone-deep way only trauma and time can teach is simple, and terrible people will often choose comfort over courage and silence over the messy business of siding with someone who is being hurt. That silence is not neutral. It's an accessory to harm. If you watched and did nothing, whether because you feared losing status, or you thought it wasn't your fight, or you convinced yourself you were apolitical, know this: silence made that ballroom play out the way it did. So I'm asking you now, from the other side of all that noise, what would you do when you hear someone being erased? When you see privilege weaponized against a person? Do you reach out? Do you document? Do you call someone out? Or do you tuck your chin and hope it doesn't touch you next? Tell me in the comments. Right? Wrong? Complicated. I want to hear the hard things. Share a time you saw someone silenced or when you stayed quiet and wished you hadn't. We learn from those confessions. If this story landed on you, if it made you angry or sad or both, hit like subscribe. If you want more real-life stories told without gloss, and leave a comment. Because silence isn't safe and the smallest voice joining another can change the whole room.